Sean, this week you talked about confidence. So can you unpack what that means for our family?
Absolutely. So last week I talked about how the culture teaches us that self is the most important. Culture also teaches us what kinds of things to pursue so that we can have all that the world has to offer. And as followers of Jesus, we're always caught in between these two kingdoms, the kingdom of the world and the kingdom of God. And so we're living for the kingdom of God, but we're living in the kingdom of the world. And so that makes this really difficult because worldly things are always right in front of us. But it was no different for Paul. And I love what he says in Philippians 3. He says, I have more reason than anyone to put confidence in the flesh. And he goes on to give his resume as a former Jewish leader. Paul was on the fast track in his profession and career. He was respected among the people. And then he says in verse 7, whatever I gained with all of that, I now consider loss for the sake of Christ. All that other stuff, he says, was garbage. But knowing Christ and running after him is what matters most to me now. And that's where my confidence comes from. It comes from the resurrection of Jesus, which is pretty cool.
Mm-hmm. Now, sometimes, I don't know about you, but I sometimes put confidence in the wrong things. Mm-hmm. I put them in myself, in my own effort that I have. I put them in my home or in the things I do, my job. But God only wants us to be confident in one thing, and that's his son, Jesus.
Right.
And he's the only thing that matters in our life, and he's the only one who never fails. So all the confidence that we have should be all placed in him. He's stronger than anyone. He holds all wisdom and truth, and there's nothing that's impossible for him.
Absolutely. And we have to constantly be reminded of that because it's easy to forget. Mm-hmm. We've been conditioned to put our trust and confidence in things that provide us with stability, like a career, a salary, a home, mm-hmm. an education. These aren't inherently bad, but they're all temporary. And so real confidence comes from stripping ourselves from what the world says we should pursue and choose instead to pursue knowing more of Jesus. And everything outside of Christ is a loss. And so we put the world in the rearview mirror and we press forward in our relationship with Jesus. And so Paul says in verse 10, he says, I want to know Christ and the power of his resurrection. And when that becomes our number one goal, we will not only know more of Jesus, we'll be able to be used more by Jesus. God can use you for kingdom work no matter what. We're not perfect, but God's plan for us is. And he desires for us to pursue him in everything we do, and he promises that he will never leave us nor forsake us.
So our challenge this week for you is this. How are you going to pursue Jesus more? What do you need to do to have a deeper relationship with him? Maybe it's coming to your small group more regularly. Maybe it's reading the Bible more, just getting to know his word. Maybe it's spending time with him in prayer. Not just talking to him and giving him all the desires of our hearts, but maybe it's time that we need to just listen to him for a while. So what's one thing that you're going to do this week to get closer to Jesus? Hey NextGen families, we're back for another week to share another part of Centerpoint's history with you today. And so do you remember last week when I talked about how the kids, there was not enough room for them to meet in the country club? Well, I'm standing in front of the spot where the kids met. They met in this barn, it's called the barn, and they met in the upstairs part of this building. And there was already a daycare center kind of setup up there, so it was a really good setup for the kids to be up there, especially for little ones, because they could use some of the equipment that was already there. And Logan, do you know how many kids they had about then?
Yeah, so at that point they had about 10 kids, all 6th grade and below, and they had like 2 or 3 students, so not a whole lot of students yet at that point.
No, just think of your job. It would have been so easy.
A lot different for sure.
So the adults met in the country club and the kids met in the barn for about 1.5 years. And then unfortunately there was a fire in the Beckett Ridge Country Club, and so the adults had to couldn't meet there. They had to move to a different location. So the decision was made that the adults would then meet upstairs in this building where the kids used to be, and that meant the kids had to move somewhere else.
Right, yeah, that kind of brought up a little bit of an issue. And so what happened is the kids actually ended up moving back over to Janet's house. And so back where the church really kind of began, the kids went back over there. And parents, I mean, imagine that for a second, right? Dropping your kid off at a location and then you driving somewhere else for church. Not exactly
Not
ideal.
ideal.
No, not exactly ideal. But that was our short history here at Beckett Ridge, and but we're still super proud of it, and we're super happy that this is a part of our story. But you know, next week after this, we're gonna go to another location, which is where we moved to after Beckett Ridge, and we want to make sure you guys join us because we're ready to take you to school. So we'll see you guys then.
See ya.